Okay, now earlier on this morning we were given some context and insight to how creativity can win in a technology-driven world. We're now going to turn our attention to convergence and how best to leverage technology creatively to increase consumer engagement. So please may I welcome to the stage Julian Baker, who's the Global Chief Creative Officer at Imagination, Anton Christodoulou, who's Global Chief Technology Officer at Imagination, and Callum, Director of Design at Jaguar. Come on up, guys. Thank you.
So it's still good morning. So good morning. Ian and I are going to take you through a journey of the creative process which we've both been through, Jaguar and Imagination working in partnership and utilising creative technology throughout that process. And we're going to take you through the whole of that journey, right from the inception of the I-Pace, the all-electric vehicle for Jaguar, to the engagement, to the customer journey at the very end of that. And we'll comment as we go through on the key milestones and observations. So, Ian?
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, good afternoon. Creativity and technology, I don't think there's a product more abundant in it than a motor car, believe you me. We have a lot of creative people, and of course, a lot of technologically driven engineers as well. This has been a great journey for us. We've worked with Imagination a lot in the past, various aspects of exhibitions and such like. This is the first journey we've taken it literally from the very beginning right through to the customer. It's been fascinating, especially with this car. I want to talk a little bit about the car to begin with. It's the I-Pace. And the motor industry is about to go through the biggest change in its whole 100 years of existence, with electrification, with automation, and of course with digitization. And it's going through that as we speak. And I think within 10 years' time, the automotive industry will be completely different from what we know today. I know it will be. Now, the I-Pace was the first electric car that we produced. It's the first electric car, full electric car, in Europe, actually. So it's a Jaguar. Be proud. We're very proud of it. And it actually shocked the world, too. So we created something that, from the platform up, was a whole new concept. And it gave designers the freedom that they've never had before. So for a design point of view, it's really a fantastic venture to go on. And it really was quite challenging. But let me just go through some of the process first. We start with sketches. Yes, we actually draw cars, and that's how we start designing cars. Of course, in this case, because our package was so free, being an electric car, we were able to create something very, very different indeed, which is a cab-forward, 5-seater, 5-door car. Never really seen before in this mode. So we're heading, because it's a Jaguar, we need to have exciting proportions, great stance, and all that good stuff, which I could talk for about hours. But this is not what we're here to talk about. I want to talk about more about the process. So we go into rendering. We start in digital already. We actually use Photoshop to render our pictures. There are no original sketches left anymore. It all goes straight onto a computer screen, which is quite sad in a way, but it's just something we got used to doing. We get lots of prints off it, and then I usually take them and sign them and get the credit. Anyway, no, it's not entirely true. I do them on drawings. But we do go into digital, and we go into digital quite quickly in 2D, and then we go into digital in 3D. And that's when we start creating three-dimensional models, and at that point, we have a digital model of the car, which is very important because that's the master. The digital model is always the master. Remember, every aspect of this car has to go through this, and we can slowly but surely build up an entire car with every component as a digital master model. And then we take that digital model we've created, and we create a clay model. Yes, back to the craftsmanship. The artisan side of our work is still there. And the reason we do that is because we want to manipulate the subtlety of surfaces and the excitement of the car and see them in real life as much as we can, although there's a lot more augmented experimentation going on at this point as well at the moment. The next car we do has a lot more augmented reality in it as well as the clay model. But the clay model is very important. It's important because we have to see what we're doing. Every single detail of that car has to go through this process. We digitize it, it goes back into the main computer of the digital model, which is then interacting with all the inputs that we have within the car, which you can imagine is absolutely thousands of them. So it's an interactive digital process. And then, of course, eventually we can create our digital models as images, which we do to sell to our management, to sell to and to our skeptics usually. And we create these digital models. We don't use photographs. We actually go digital immediately. And of course, eventually, we'll create even more sophisticated digital model images to present from marketing clinics and such like. So that's how we work. We are in a digital world all the time. Digital is master for us. The interior has to go through the same thing. Every aspect, this is the biggest piece of product design in the world, the interior of a car. Every aspect of it has to be digital. Incidentally, we talked earlier about, some point about how clever digital is. The processing power of one of our cars is more, incidentally, than the processing power of a 380 Airbus. That's how clever your cars are, digitally. We then went into an experiment hub, a lab, with imagination. They said, let's take this information, let's try it out as a virtual world. And we tried this out, we put people in different rooms, and completely sold to me the idea that we could actually take our virtual model and turn it into something much, much more interesting, much more special. And we spoke to each other across various rooms at this lab. So that was the first point of our interaction.
So traditionally, a creative process is a linear, iterative journey. And sometimes you do loops along that journey, but essentially you get to a point where you have an idea, and you have to hold on to that idea because you're extending that idea into different worlds. And really, that's about governance. It's about how you control that thing. But if you're using technology so overtly in your creative process, you have all this metadata, which is right at the inception of the idea. And it means that you can actually create that world in a much more connected, continuous way. And that's super, super smart because it's measurable, it's absolutely connected, and it means that you can actually accelerate all the things that you do. And rather than having to hold on to this thing, you can actually bring people into it. So when you first release an idea, a product, a vehicle, you need to bring into that influencers and VIPs and skeptical media. And actually, it was a really wonderful opportunity to use VR, which Ian used really overtly throughout the whole design process, and actually bring people into this world of VR. But VR is actually quite an intimate, and it's a very individual kind of experience. And so together, we wanted it to become very, very generous and very sociable in how we'd bring people in. So the image that you're looking at is actually a studio space which we designed. And imagine there's rows of people, 53 people who are actually on these tables with 6 people per table. We replicated that space in the virtual world. So when you came and sat down and you put your VR headset on, you could still see the person that was next to you, and you still could see the exact space that you were in. We also had people in other cities around the world, so we could bring those people into this environment as well. So we had this collected, sociable VR experience, and you were sat in this space, which was actually quite ordinary, and that was really important because you had a point of reference, which was ordinary, which then allowed you to go and do really extraordinary things.
So when I first spoke to the guys' imagination about this, I saw an opportunity. And I wanted this car, being the most advanced car certainly I'd ever worked on, in fact, probably the most advanced car that Jaguar had, to be very special in its presentation. I wanted this car to be the car that fell to earth. And Bowie fans will know exactly what I'm talking about there. It's a generation thing, I know. So it was a car that fell to earth. How could we demonstrate that in reality? There was no way we could do it in reality unless we had squillions and squillions of pounds to spend. So we actually did the whole thing virtually. So we actually created the car that we started off in space, and then we fell to earth.
So without sounding like Brian Cox, the thing about technology, and especially VR, is there's no such thing as time and space, because you can actually play entirely with all of those dimensions. And so Ian was actually in a room next to those studios, and we were live beaming him as virtual Ian with a virtual car into this experience. And what's incredible about that is that there's 400 people in this room, and we're talking, and we're all actually organized spatially because of the restraints we have in reality. If we created this room in VR, Ian and I could actually be stood right in front of each of you individually. And that's exactly what we did in this experience. So all of the people that came to this moment, this experience, Ian narrated the story and actually was right directly in front of everybody. So everybody was getting a collective, sociable experience, but also a really valuable personal experience, which is a thrilling experience where we could tell these very natural stories. So the image you're looking at is when the car fell to earth, it landed on this salt flat, and it drove through into LA, and we were able to talk about all of the issues around electric vehicles and about sustainability.
So it wasn't just me. I had my colleague Ian Hoban, who was the chief engineer in the project, and he was able to tell the audience individually as as Julian was saying, about the technology of it. And the thing was, we put this car on the table, almost like a large-scale model, and they could dip into it, literally. They could see everything inside this car because every component was virtual inside this car. And they were dipping their eyes into the virtual screen into the car and seeing the motors, there's no gearbox, of course, the motors, the suspension, the seats, the dashboard, and everything. And it was really quite an incredible experience to literally have such a transparent view of what this car was made of. And remember, we're dealing with very skeptical and slightly cynical journalists, car journalists. So when they saw the entirety of this car in front of them in their own space, it was really quite remarkable.
And the other thing about creative technology is it's an incredibly transformational opportunity for everybody, because mass customization gives you opportunities to understand every single person that you're dealing with individually, because we know people before they actually arrive and they come and engage with us. So you can make everything outcome-led. And so when people, the VIPs or the journalists left, we could make bespoke content for them that actually allows them to go and tell the right story in the right way that we want them to go and influence around it. And there was a moment of then pure magic which we were able to deliver, which is, so imagine at the very end of this whole presentation that in that studio space in the center was virtual Ian with virtual car, and in LA, unbeknownst to the people, we just asked them to move their VR headsets up, and then in front of them was real Ian and real car, which was placed there.
It was a great moment. Please excuse me for the jeans. Imagination made me wear them. I was on a green room, so therefore I had to wear light clothes. Anyway, it was a wonderful moment because these people had been submerged into a world which really was their world. It was completely convincing. I was there in that world, and then of course when they took their goggles, headpieces off, we'd push the car on while they weren't looking. Obviously, they were in their own world, and I was standing there beside it to give them the final part of the presentation. So they went from the virtual world to real world, and I think that for them, that connectivity, that connection, rather, was really quite stunning. And it was a great moment because all the skeptics had come in and said, well, you know, this is you trying to be a bit too fancy. They came out of these headsets and they were utterly convinced.
The Jaguar I-Pace concept is a stablemate to the hugely successful F-Pace. It's a performance car, a family car, and an SUV all in one. And it's electric.
I'm smiling because that really was one of the best moments of my life, I have to tell you. It was fantastic, it really was. Now, here's the advertising pitch. This is the new I-Pace. We finally put it in production. It's been down in Portugal for the last 6 weeks, presenting to all the journalists, including lifestyle journalists and techie journalists now, to the world, and it really is a huge hit. This is the first European all-electric car, and it is the best car in the world. There, I've said it. So I believe that, actually. You need to drive one. I mean, apart from the aesthetics looking great, you need to drive one to really believe how good this car is. It's phenomenal. Zero emissions.
Going back to the creative process, again, because we've got this constant, continuous, always-on metadata which we can use, you can actually go straight to market with it. So essentially, you no longer are sort of creating, as a creative agency, projects which have other projects around it. You end up, like it or not, having products. And those products have IP in them. You have to be able to understand how you can take the business opportunities around those. It changes your whole model because you can actually get license agreements on those things. And it means that you can actually go really, really quick into dealerships. So on here, we created that model, which we could take straight to 1,800 dealers in 20 languages instantly. And it meant that you could get inside the vehicle, you could get pre-orders, and you could actually spec the vehicle in a configurator. And we had that both on a tablet with AR, with a little trigger box, which is demonstrated downstairs, as well as on a mobile phone, as well as having a headset. And everybody got this amazing experience where they understood what electric really meant for everybody. And the last sort of message from me, really, which is every brand in the world understands how to articulate themselves very eloquently within a visual identity system. They understand what their values are, what their positioning, what their essence is. And we're privileged to work together, Ian and I, on the Leaper, which is on the vehicles, and it's in all the prints, and it's in all the communications of Jaguar vehicles. Really sophisticated brands understand how to behave and experience around their brands, and so they have frameworks which are experience identities. And so in the middle there is a mad thing which we did in Shanghai in front of 27 million people, which streamed it live, which was the loop of a Jaguar vehicle. There are very, very few, I think there's probably only one, which is stood next to me, who understands how to do an immersive guideline. How, as a brand, do you behave in an immersive world? And it's a minefield. It's like being a blind man in a minefield if you don't understand what you're dealing with, because immersive technology uses proxies, it uses algorithms, it uses all sorts of things like AI and voice. You can imagine if you had a voice bot and it was from the government and you asked that voice bot, what do you think about homosexuality? And it actually gave you the wrong answer. As far as you're concerned, you're talking directly to that person. And so really, there's very few companies in the world that really understand what 2D, 3D, and 4D immersive technologies really mean. And I think that that's a pioneering world, which we all need to get to very, very quickly.
So just to sum up, really, we've had a great journey with this car. It's been entirely digital in so many ways. And right through now to the customer, really the first time we're immersing the customer in this digital world. But it's been great working with Imagination in this because we're very like-minded companies. Jag is a very creative company. These guys are very creative, and between us we managed to pull through to areas of creativity that neither of us knew possible before. So thank you.
Thank you. So the last part of this presentation, I'd like to introduce Anton. Anton is the CTO of Imagination, and it's very interesting to see from the other side of the table. Anton and I work very closely together through creative and technology, and Anton's going to take you through a few of the frameworks about technology through creativity.
Thanks, Ian and Julian. Afternoon, everyone. How you doing? Excellent. So we're in a really exciting time at the moment with technology. And as a creative agency and believing as creativity being at the heart of what we do, we have for decades, and in fact millennia, we've been using technology in order to create amazing experiences in one way or another. I think the key difference at the moment, certainly in the last 10 or 20 years, is the acceleration of what technology can do, from artificial intelligence to immersive technology to blockchain. This is having a really big impact on every industry. And I believe passionately in terms of creativity, this offers us a massive opportunity. What's also more important to think about is when you're creating experiences is you never put technology or use technology for technology's sake. And so when we're thinking about how we build and how we create experiences, we kind of sort of this evolution of how we work in terms of you can have a pure kind of analog experience, may have some invisible components of technology. It might be driving the new I-Pace through Portugal, or it might be seeing a firework display or going to the theatre. And those are really important moments, and they may be captured with technology. They may even be elements of that are enabled invisibly. But these are about kind of these real kind of important human connection moments around how you experience life. And then if you talk about, and we talked about earlier in terms of what we tried to do or what we achieved hopefully with the I-Pace launch, was about making sure that an experience is social. And this isn't about social media or social networking per se. Those are technologies that have emerged in the last 10 to 20 years to make human connection more amplified, more vivid, mostly positive, but sometimes negatively in terms of the way it drives behaviors. But actually, again, this comes back down to sitting around a campfire and sharing stories. And this is around social as a way of ensuring that when you're creating engagement around the story that you're telling, you do it in an effective way. Now, where technology is really starting now to kind of break into that is around augmented experiences. And here, this interesting line from Iason Athanasiadis, I can just about say that because I'm Greek Cypriot as well, I assume he is. But he did this quote from actually quite a dystopian article around the fact that in the next 5 to 10 years, technology or media or digital media is going to be in your common environment. Even me up on stage now, it's reasonable that I could be wearing glasses or ultimately some sort of implant potentially that can tell me how the audience is reacting, could tell me who people are, it could be reminding me around the timing or even telling me what to say. And so this is going to become, and it's already becoming, a really important aspect of experiences. And so from our point of view, it's understanding both the positive and the negative impacts of that, but also how we can really use that in experiences when led by the creative idea. So again, when we've talked quite a lot already about immersive, and in the relatively short time I've got to talk today, that's one of the areas that I'm going to focus on, because as a new medium, this is an area that is having a big impact on the work we do, as you've already seen. And again, when we talk about immersive, we're not talking about technology, we're talking about immersing or immersion, being really involved in something, being really connected to something. So really, when you talk about immersive technology, all you're really talking about is the application of that technology to immerse someone. And so again, with the iPace launch, it was really about, we wanted to immerse people in a story and be able to tell the story in a really unique way, but we wanted to make sure that that was still a very social experience, and so using it in the most effective way. As we've gone through this journey, the first ever VR experience was done about 20 years ago when we created a product launch. But in the last, I'd say, like 5 years, we started 5 to 6 years, we started using VR more and more with the first Oculus development kits that came out. We started to explore what was possible, and we've gone through quite a rapid evolution in terms of technology. And so for us, both internally to qualify and categorize what we do, but also with our clients to help our clients understand, is we created essentially a tool or a methodology around what type of immersive experiences are. And I tend to kind of think of this a bit like around a decade ago when mobile apps became the main thing, and everyone would come and say, we need to have a mobile app. And you say, okay, why do you want a mobile app? Because everyone else has got a mobile app. And they say, well, but really, what's the purpose of that app? Sometimes it made sense to do it. Many times it actually didn't, and it was a waste. And so the key part of this in terms of creating any experience, of course, is around a business purpose. Even we believe passionately that creativity transforms business, you still need to have a clear idea of what it is you're trying to achieve. And through, for example, launching the first electric car, or being able to take that electric car and put it into thousands of dealerships really, really quickly, there needs to be a really clear goal. What is it you're trying to achieve? The context is important. Do you want to create a mass experience that everyone can share? Do you want to create something more personal? And it's really important, again, to understand what the purpose of that is in terms of the reach and amplification of what you're doing. And certainly very much at the moment, because it's moving so quickly, you could say software here as well, but software in this particular context around immersive is actually just driving and connecting these pieces together. Hardware is actually having a major impact on the way we experience things. And at the moment, what is available does have a big impact on what is possible. Many of you, well, all of you, I expect, in this room would have heard of Magic Leap, for example, which is still yet to be officially available, although launched. And those types of technologies, the next version of the HoloLens or the next version of a VR headset and the way you track around the room, all these things are moving really, really quickly. And so for us, we're quite lucky in the sense that we can actually leverage some of these advances quite quickly when we're doing it for a particular experience. If you look at what we did with the iPace launch, there'd never been that many headsets all linked together and linked together across the globe in the way that we've done it before. But also that comes obviously with its own challenges. And so if you start to think about this in four particular areas, you start around the kind of passive sort of utility where you might want to be telling a particular story around, say, a particular product or service or a global initiative. You move up towards the entertainment side. That still is from some of you recognize from Mr. Robot, where they actually created an immersive 360 film that added an extra dimension to the series and gave you a bit more insight, but also, again, immersed you more into the key story. But these are very much passive tools. These are things where we can tell a story more powerfully, but there's little interaction or none. Video games, of course, going back to, you could argue, actually the 80s, certainly the early 90s, with the emergence of things like Doom and first-person games, have been immersive for decades. And with the now VR and AR into the mix, those video games now are being repurposed, recreated, reimagined, using this as a powerful medium. But the area for me that really is the most exciting is the active utility. And this is around, you talk about it as a tool, but actually this is around essentially becoming superhuman. This is being able to add superpowers to what you do, to be, as I mentioned earlier, by having some sort of headset or sensors in, I know more about the environment than the people that I'm with. I can maybe detect the emotions of the people, how they're responding in a certain situation, and that gives me an advantage. It might be that I'm on an oil rig and I need to be able to operate a certain piece of machinery which I don't know how to use, or I might need to do some remote surgery. There's all sorts of different ways in which this technology can be used to really accelerate what we're doing. And these are some of the examples, but unsurprisingly, we've been working across all of these areas. We worked with HSBC, for example, where we talked about a multi-trillion, actually, initiative around the Belt and Road, the new Silk Road. We've used it for telling stories as diverse as the Anzacs in Australia, and through to how a particular fuel works. In the more interactive entertainment side, we created a horror experience for the Gadget Show, which was blending VR and the physical aspects together. And at the moment, we're exploring what we like to call hyper-reality. So how do we bring together all of your senses and components into something really, really powerful? And then again, in active utility, we're using this obviously for creating amazing experiences with our clients to be able to drive engagement and product stories, etc. But we're also using it with JLR as part of the ideation and creative process. So actually creating physical experiences in VR before we actually create the real experience. So we can actually sit down and go through that ideation process and actually see how things are going to work almost physically before we get to that final process. And we're also working with Cambridge University with the science department on a super interesting project, which you'll hear more about in the coming weeks. So what this really all comes down to, essentially, for us is, that's one area of how we use this from an immersive perspective. But the thing that we're really, really excited and is kind of both in our kind of cultural heritage and the way we think strategically is we create connected experiences. human connection at the end of the day is the most important thing in terms of telling stories and building engagement. And this is something that we believe fundamentally. And I'm very lucky from a technology perspective to be able to see and work with Julian and Ian and others around how we take these crazy ideas that have never been done before and then use technology to bring those to life. Imagination Selves, we're marking our 50th year this year. I like to refer to us as a 50-year-old startup. We have a sort of culturally entrepreneurial spirit in terms of how we look at and develop ideas. And just to really, again, thanks Julian and Ian, and just to finish off, here's a few examples of the work we've done recently. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Well, thank you very much to Anton, Julian and Ian. Yes, round of applause for that. Round of applause.